So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Michelle. I'm honored to be your host this afternoon with the BC Links to Learning with Can Do. It's a new month, so we're excited for what we are going to learn this week. So our guest today is Jesse Robson. He is joining us from Regina, Saskatchewan. That's my old stomping grounds. I'm a Saskatchewan gal, but I live here in Edmonton, Treaty 6 territory. So glad you are all here. Feel free to use that chat box. Let us know where you are joining from. This also is recorded. So welcome, hello to those who might be catching this later on. So today's conversation is really rich, really good. I had an opportunity to listen to Jesse this morning. It's about Canadian agriculture and food. It's a $49 billion industry, and it's loaded with opportunity. So you'll hear details that could help you navigate through the challenges facing First Nations businesses and communities, as Jesse from Farm Credit Canada highlights key points from the recent article in the Journal of Aboriginal Economic Development. I'm going to give a little background to who our guest is this afternoon. Before we get started, there is going to be plenty of opportunity to ask any questions or field any comments that you may have at the end. But throughout the presentation, if you have a question, feel free to use that chat box and put it in there, and I definitely will make note of it, and we will definitely get to it. There also will be an evaluation link sent to you. Would be awesome for you to fill that out. Awesome for us, because I think your feedback, your voice is really, really important. But you also, when you fill out that evaluation, your name will be entered to win one of two $400 Visa gift cards. So please fill out that evaluation. And I believe that Jesse's PowerPoint, his presentation, also will be sent to you, and that has some good information, such as contact information, that maybe afterwards you have some questions that you could field those questions towards him via email. So Jesse is a graduate of First Nations University of Canada. He started with the Farm Credit Canada in 2010. Since then, Jesse has had roles on the FCC creative writing team, communications, and human resources before joining Indigenous relations as a strategist. In 2020, Jesse began compiling research and writing to submit a paper for the latest issue of the Journal of Aboriginal Economic Development. So 2020 was a great year to just dive into that research. You'll hear key learnings from that paper during his presentation. So we feel very honored to have you speak and lend your experience, what you have learned, what you're doing. So we welcome you, Jesse. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. It's great to be here, great to be able to have the chance to speak with everybody. I'm going to share my screen here and get to it. Okay. Ambawashte, Nakoniabi Amagiab Wachega Yuza. Good day. In the Nakota language, they call me carries the prayer cloth. My name is Jesse Robson. I work for Farm Credit Canada on the Indigenous relations team as a strategist. My father was Anishinaabe. My mother, she's German, but I married a Cree Nakota woman, and her Nakota grandmother brought me into the Sundance to receive my name. So that's why I introduced myself that way. While today's session is being delivered virtually, wherever we find ourselves today in Canada, we are on traditional Indigenous territories with rich traditions, stories, and histories that should be understood and honored. I'm delivering this presentation, as Michelle said, from Regina. The land on which we are learning, working, and living today is Treaty 4 territory, the original lands of the Cree, Anishinaabe, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Language is an important aspect of culture. Cultural knowledge, practices, traditions, and stories are passed down from generation to generation and without language, these cultural elements could be lost. As such, it is important to note that the 70 First Nations in Saskatchewan are part of 5 linguistic groups: Cree, Dakota, Dene, Nakota, and Saulteaux. FCC offices are spread all across Canada, covering all treaty areas, unceded and unsurrendered territories, and the traditional homelands of the Métis. I encourage each of you to learn more about the history of the land where you work, live, and play. Nativeland.ca is an excellent resource that we use to help with this learning. We're fortunate for this land at FCC because we serve an industry that needs the land, that feeds the world by growing crops and raising livestock and building their livelihoods on this land. So all of this is possible thanks to the treaties. And we are reminded that we are all treaty people. And that's something, as FCC has got into Indigenous ag, that we're really paying attention to. So today's land recognition serves to honor the treaties that were made on all territories and acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past. And along with our efforts to support the success of Indigenous agriculture in Canada, it is part of our commitment to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. As mentioned, I had took part in researching and writing for the Journal of Aboriginal Economic Development, and we wanted to talk about the opportunities and challenges for First Nations in one of Canada's biggest industries, that's agriculture and food. So earlier this year, the Indigenous Relations team began working on that research paper. Now, FCC being Canada's leading lender in agriculture and food, we knew there were a lot of topics that we needed to cover. And that meant a lot of research and networking, because while as a corporation, FCC knows a lot about ag and food, we also know that there's many details that are unique to Indigenous agriculture, specifically First Nations agriculture for this paper, and lending on reserve. And we wanted to make sure that we got it right. What we did know for sure in this paper, an industry like ag and food, where land is equal to wealth, First Nations communities are poised to use their land to succeed and become leaders in ag and food. But as of now, there's a big gap in First Nations with great agricultural land and First Nations success in this industry. And that's why we wanted to write this report. We want Indigenous businesses to see that now is the time to take a good look at this industry. Before writing the paper for the Journal of Aboriginal Economic Development, we virtually met with the editor of the journal, and he was excited to have a submission from us because in all previous publications, nobody had submitted on the topic of agriculture. So his excitement shows the growing interest from Indigenous business and communities. When it came to certain topics around some of the laws and regulations of First Nations land in Canada and effective ways to do business, we worked with a law firm called MLT Aikens. They were great. They contributed a lot to the research paper around what works for First Nations businesses and communities. Their contribution to this paper was an integral part of the information that we wanted to share. So miigwech to them. Now, the paper will be coming out, I believe it's hot off the presses as we speak. So it should be coming out to Canada membership relatively soon, available. I encourage everybody to read it. FCC will be promoting the digital versions, I think, in any way that we can. So keep an eye out for the latest issue of the Journal of Aboriginal Economic Development. The main message we wanted to communicate in this research paper is the opportunity for First Nations in agriculture and food. First Nations businesses and communities are in a position to find significant success in the industry. Ag and food in Canada is big, and it has a lot of room for growth. So as you see these slides, notice that some of the messaging around opportunity and potential, that's what we want to bring to our Indigenous customers and prospects. As mentioned, some of the numbers in ag and food, it's a $49 billion industry, and accounting for 2.6% of the total GDP in Canada. Now, as we saw in 2020, ag and food is also quite recession-proof. So it's a safe industry that's going to continually need to feed the world. Breaking that $49 billion down, we see that it's almost split down the middle between agriculture and food production. Now, we want to encourage Indigenous business to look at both sides of that ag and food industry, which makes the most sense for them. Maybe it's both, maybe it's parts up and down the value chain. And while there is incredible opportunity now, And in the future, in ag and food, Indigenous, specifically First Nations, have been less involved in the industry than non-Indigenous Canadians. And that FCC, we're really looking to help change that. It's good for the ag and food industry to have Indigenous businesses succeeding, but it's also a great opportunity for Indigenous nations. So what are some of the benefits of success in the ag and food industry for First Nations? A well-run farm might take a few years to really hit its stride, but once it does, it can provide food sovereignty, financial security, career opportunities. And I know that the creation of jobs and careers for band members, it's more than a job. It's agricultural knowledge that you're building in your community, that's staying in your community. That's an important point because many non-Indigenous rural Canadians grow up with generations of agriculture in their family and ag knowledge that's passed on to the next generation. But the same hasn't always been true for Indigenous, specifically First Nations. So increasing the capacity of agricultural knowledge among Indigenous in Canada is an important part of our work here at FCC. And that last bullet point, vertical integration, which means controlling that food system from top to bottom. And we know there are some communities that are better set up to do vertical integration than others. And some communities are better suited in specific aspects along the value chain of food. Right now, there is a need for First Nations control of First Nations food. 48% of households on First Nations are food insecure, with some as high as 60%. The ag and food industry has potential to be part of a change here. It's not just opportunity in ag and food, there's opportunity for First Nations to address some of the challenges they're facing. So what does vertical integration look like for an Indigenous community? A well-built food system can benefit the whole community. In the paper we wrote for the journal, we discussed the Quapaw tribe in the United States. They've taken a long-term approach to regaining their own food sovereignty. And I say regaining because Indigenous people did have food sovereignty long ago. So this example, even though it's from the US, it really shows elements of vertical integration that a First Nation community in Canada can aspire to, or take parts of that, the ones that work best for them. So let's take a look at how the Quapaw moved towards vertical integration of their food system. And for the sake of time, this will be a pretty quick overview for them. But I think your own roles and experience could help fill in some of the gaps there. The Quapaw, they started out small by purchasing 5 head of bison. From there, they saw an opportunity to grow and partner with their tribe's casino restaurant to provide bison meat. Now, hypothetically, that kind of partnership could be done with any nearby business or any nearby food product. But once the bison partnership started showing some success, they got into cattle ranching as well. With the bison and the casino restaurant relationship working, the Quapaw began looking at what else they could do with this model. The casino was using a lot of vegetables and all from outside the community. So that meant there was a gap there, an opportunity to fill that gap with their own vegetables. But in order to meet that demand and supply vegetables year round, they would need greenhouses. So leadership, they went through the process of securing financing, building greenhouses. They began growing fresh vegetables. And then the same with honey. Their community was purchasing a lot of honey. So they went into beekeeping. With the meat, the veggies, and the honey, they got involved in raising, growing, and producing that food. That's the agriculture side. But the Quapaw also saw an opportunity to create their own coffee. But with coffee, they got involved with the food processing side of the ag and food industry. So they acquired the appropriate equipment that allowed them to process and package coffee beans they brought in. So now they supply their own community with coffee. And once they had gained experience in all these food areas, they saw another opportunity. I didn't take this photo, but this is Black Angus cattle from the Quapaw Cattle Ranch. In order to provide their own community with its own beef or bison meat, the Quapaw would actually need to have the cattle slaughtered and processed outside of their community. So that's where they saw another gap along the vertical integration. They had to ship the livestock to Colorado and then to Missouri for dry aging, then bring it back home. So in order to truly own their food system, the Quapaw needed their own meat processing plant. Now the leadership admits to having that having been a significant challenge, but also essential to their food sovereignty. They actually had to work closely with the US federal government to understand the regulations and find ways to make everything work within the system. But it meant being able to raise cattle and process that cattle and supply the meat without it ever leaving their community. Obviously, this creates more permanent jobs. It allows the meats to stay in their community and gives them control of what is done with it. This is vertical integration of their beef and bison, and it allows them to be more sovereign. It allows for more easy, easier to profit off of the bison and the beef when they're controlling the entire food system from top to bottom there. And now this would look different for each community, but this example is a great example of how one Indigenous nation is reclaiming their food sovereignty. There's actually another example on FCC's website in our knowledge section, just about, it's actually of a non-Indigenous farm that speaks to the food side. But I wanted to highlight that because I think it's applicable to some First Nations or Indigenous nations. So this non-Indigenous farm, they found wild blueberries on their land. And they simply harvested and then sold the blueberry harvest, and that gave them about a 4 to 6 week window of profit. But they saw an opportunity to add value to their raw product by creating a juice. They went to work to create not just a juice, but a brand for that juice. They made deals to get their juice on the shelves, and in a few years, they were selling their blueberry product across Canada year-round. So effectively, they extended a 6 week window into a year-round product. So a big part of the opportunity for First Nations in agriculture is adding value to that product in ways that work for their community. We know that buying local is a trend that continues to be popular among consumers, and also that a well-made Indigenous product actually performs very well compared to non-Indigenous products. So that Indigenous product brand coupled with the local product brand creates a good advantage for Indigenous food products. At FCC, we know First Nations communities in Canada are forced to operate within the Indian Act. And the Indian Act creates a lot of barriers when it comes to business, especially agriculture. So a lot of our work is focused on the relationship between the potential of agriculture for First Nations and the regulations of the Indian Act. One option is the First Nations Land Management Act. So let's quickly look at the framework agreement on First Nations land management. The framework agreement allows a First Nation to access the First Nations Land Management Act. In turn, that gives the First Nations some wiggle room on the constraints of the Indian Act to make it easier for First Nation to secure financing. The framework agreement is an option for band governments who opt out of the land management sections of the Indian Act and replace it with their own lawmaking. So to opt out of the 44 sections of the Indian Act pertaining to land, the band needs to sign the framework agreement. It's a government-to-government relationship agreement, actually, between a First Nation and the government of Canada that allows the First Nation to take over the governance and management control of their own land and natural resources. Effectively, it allows them to create their own land code. It currently has 165 signatories. Some, like the Dakota Whitecap First Nation here in Saskatchewan, has seen a lot of success as a result of having their own land code. Now, I'm no expert on the framework agreement on First Nations land management, but I encourage you to go to the First Nations Land Management Resource Center. They have all the documents, details, contacts, and resources right there. I highlight this because agriculture and food businesses require structures, and it's that loan for structures that financial institutions may have the most difficulty approving. So the framework agreement can make things easier. Each situation and each First Nations community is different. So this could take some detailed conversations to move along towards financing. So definitely worth looking into. Just like each community has its own goals and needs, each farm has its own set of goals and needs. And typically here are the types of financing required for an ag and food business. Of these, as I said, it's the loan for structures that creates the most challenges when securing financing. But really quick, I just want to talk about the farm equipment financing loan. There are two distinctions important to equipment financing on reserve, and they are around taking the equipment as collateral to secure financing. The primary focus of the on reserve equipment lending is within the conditional sales contract. That's done via the dealership and a band council resolution. So this pertains to a First Nations corporation, individual, or First Nation band. The conditional sales contract supersedes Section 89 provisions of the Indian Act, and this allows a perfected or actual ability to realize on that collateral. Basically, what that means is that gives the band council resolution gives the right of way to use the equipment as collateral. And this means that a financial institution can use the value of that equipment to lend. Now, the second distinction there is private equipment financing does not use a conditional sales contract. Therefore, Section 89 is applicable. If privately purchased equipment, even with a perfected security charge against it, goes on to reverse, that equipment as it's free from seizure and encumbrance while on reserve. So there's low receptivity to private equipment financing due to Section 89 of the Indian Act when it comes to financing on reserve. That also applies to livestock financing held on reserve as well. Structures that reside on reserve land can primarily be financed if it has become designated land through Section 38(2) of the Indian Act, which is actually surrendering reserve land, and that can require years of work and requires a referendum of the people to vote on that. Or you can get designated land through a change in the First Nations land code using the framework agreement, as I mentioned earlier. And we encourage all bands to look at what works best for them. As I mentioned, one thing I wanted to really explore in this paper, it's one option that as a financial institution we look for, and that's fee simple land. Let's just take a better look at what I'm talking about here. Before purchasing land for agricultural use, we're encouraging communities or businesses, individuals to know their options. When a First Nation buys land through TLE framework or by other means, there are two options: convert the land to reserve status through the additions to reserve process, or do not convert the land to reserve status, thereby making it fee simple land. And we know there are some examples of First Nations using fee simple land quite effectively in non-ag related business. And we know that there's a lot of potential to use fee simple land in agriculture and food as well. So that's why we're looking at that. Fee simple ownership is recognized in Canada as the most complete form of ownership. It entitles the owner to full use of the property, restricted only by laws like zoning laws and environmental laws. The Indian Act does not apply to fee simple land as it does reserve land. So the question of whether a First Nation should use fee simple as opposed to reserve land depends on the First Nation's priorities. But for a bank or a financial institution like FCC, the focus is that fee simple land makes lending into that farm or food business more manageable. There are pros and cons that I encourage each First Nation business or community to look at to see what's right for them. Now, for instance, with fee simple land, many of the protections under the Indian Act will not apply, such as the statutory limits on seizure, attachment, or taxation of reserve land. However, as I said, a big positive is that owning fee simple land removes the barriers of the Indian Act, which allows for simpler lending process with financial institutions, but also gives more control and efficiency in development and expansion, gives that power back to the business or the community. Now, speaking of taxes, while reserve land brings with them the possibility of Indian Act tax exemptions, they also limit the market value of the land and limit the ability of First Nations to participate in Canada's commercial economy, which is largely based in fee simple ownership. But the reality is farming is a tax game in a way, and successful farmers, producers, businesses, they take advantage of all the write-offs, and it should be no different for First Nations. Treaty status First Nations have inherent tax advantage, and that can really help in ag and food. We encourage First Nations businesses to work with their lawyers and accountants on models and tax advantages. When those PSD, GST exemptions are applied to crop input loans, it's the difference of thousands of dollars. Building a barn or a structure at $100,000 could cost $13,000 less. And that final bullet on the slide there, that's important. Basically, what it means is the money that a First Nation individual or corporation saves on tax can be added to the income or cash flow. Normally, a financial institution looks at the income or the assets based on the Canadian tax model, meaning the tax-free treaty rights held by an individual or First Nation-run business is not always accounted for. This essentially means that treaty rights aren't being honored there. This is something that our team at FCC is taking into account with our strategy development. One of the key factors in determining whether a farm business can qualify for the Section 87 Indian Act tax exemption is simply the location of the farm. The most important factor for grain, vegetable, or fruit farming is the location of the land where the crops are grown and harvested. Similarly, the location of cattle farming is determined by the rangelands. When assessing taxation for all other types of farming, the nature of the business and specific facts is as important as the location of the farmland. So if only some of the total revenue generating activities take place on reserve and the rest off reserve, then Section 87 exemptions may be applied proportionally to that, with business expenses taxed proportionally, unless there's a more reasonable allocation that exists for that business. Now, building a farm operation where First Nation business is operating on both fee simple land and reserve land, there's an opportunity to leverage all the advantages and make the most of your land. This is a significant competitive advantage to the community, but this takes a detailed level of planning for sure. And that's why we want First Nations businesses or communities to work with lawyers and accountants in advance to see the best ways a model like this can work to its fullest potential. Now, this brings us back to that first point that I made. In agriculture and food, land is equal to wealth. And First Nations have the land and the drive to be leaders in this industry. It's not easy to just jump into an industry, but another thing that we know is that knowledge of agriculture is important for those who are finding success in this industry. Before COVID-19, I had the chance to travel to meet customers on the Thunderchild First Nation, and I got to see their operation they call Thunder Farms. I saw their farm and met those who were involved. One of the people I had the privilege to meet was a man named Joseph Jimmy, pictured here. Sadly, he has since passed on, but he's great to talk with. And of course, he liked to have a little fun, and he was really knowledgeable about agriculture. And he didn't have a formal position with the farm, but he would always stop by in the mornings with the crew, chat with the crew to encourage them, and as well to the farm manager, and took the farm manager a little bit under his wing to share some of the old stories and how Joseph would have done things in the past. But as I said, sadly, Joseph Jimmy has passed away, but his family assured us they wanted his words to live on, and they gave us permission to use his image and words going forward. So Mr. Jimmy spent a lot of his younger adult years working on the farm, as I said. And he really enjoyed passing on that encouragement and guidance to the crew at Thunder Farms. So I wanted to share something he said to us about the First Nations youth in Canada. He said, our younger generation that are going to school now, some of them should go into agriculture. No, not only teaching, social work, recreation, not only those things, but also agriculture. And that really struck a chord with me because at FCC, we're always talking, everybody that will listen, the opportunities for youth in agriculture, going into agricultural colleges, getting degrees in agronomy, things like that. I believe the statistics show that there's 3 jobs waiting for every graduate of an ag college in parts of Canada. So 3 jobs for every graduate. The industry is overflowing with opportunity. And we talk about filling the gaps. The industry needs youth to come up and see agriculture as a viable career opportunity. And that's something that Mr. Jimmy was telling us, that FCC has been telling the youth across Canada as well. And so it's something that I really wanted to highlight here. Thunder Farms is owned and operated by the Thunderchild First Nation. Now, but they have an interesting model that seems to really be working for them. The man on the right there, that's John Wozniak. John is the farm manager for Thunder Farms. He's a non-Indigenous, semi-retired farmer from Alberta. But when Thunderchild was establishing Thunder Farms, they wanted to hire an outside expert to help them start up. And John had a career in farming and he was looking to slow down his role. So John signed a 5-year contract with Thunder Farms. His role is to manage the day-to-day operations of Thunder Farms, grow a successful crop to market each year, and mentor the crew. But another key part of his role was to find someone from Thunderchild First Nation to mentor into his own role. So once that 5 years is up, the person he's mentoring moves into the role of farm manager. This is a great model because it's bringing in a career farmer who's close to the end of his career. He leads the crew, mentors his own eventual replacement. That guy on the left there with a mustache, that's Derek Mitus. He's a Thunderchild band member, and he's been working alongside John for a couple of years now. And when John leaves, Derek hopes to take the reins as farm manager at Thunder Farms. Derek had some careers in agriculture beforehand, and he had jumped from job to job, never working with his own band in agriculture. So when he had this opportunity, he was really excited about it. He said to us, my future goal, I'd like to continue on with Thunder Farms and go to that next level, step away from the actual combining and sitting in the tractor, take over the role of managing it, learning how to do the other side of farming. It's not just about putting the seed in the ground and harvesting it. There's a different aspect to the business too that you have to know and understand. And that's one of the main things that I'm really noticing now. So Derek is excited about his role, about his future role of becoming farm manager. And so him and John work really closely together in that mentor-protege relationship. Seeing the Thunder Farms crew during harvest was a privilege for me for sure. But you can tell that the crew, they also loved what they were doing. Something I mentioned earlier was about how when you hire your own band members, you aren't just creating jobs or careers, you're teaching that agricultural knowledge to your band members. And that knowledge stays in your community, empowers your community. And that's a powerful reality. These guys are getting experience doing things they likely would not have got the chance to do anywhere else. They're doing it at home, with their own families, with their own community, and it's really special for them. You can tell they're proud of what they're doing. They're having fun doing it, and that's why I just wanted to share some of what I saw when I visited Thunder Farms. Technology in agriculture. I won't spend too much time on this, but there are some points worth discussing here. Agriculture and food technology is huge, obviously, in that industry. There's sort of an old cliche that farming is a slow-moving business, that it's older equipment, but the reality is technology in farming is rapidly increasing, and people are doing big things with technology. But as you can see the slide, having the latest tech is nice, but it's not always necessary. So we want all Indigenous businesses to know that there is an opportunity to use technology to play leapfrog, not catch up. But it's important to balance the latest technology with starting slow. Going all in on the latest models or most expensive equipment doesn't necessarily increase the chance of success. You have an early snowfall and that can change the whole crop year. So when entering agriculture, we find out that starting slow is a model that seems to work well for most. And as a farm business grows and starts to see more success, there will be opportunity to upgrade that equipment. And starting small is that important lesson. Start small, plan effectively, grow your farm slowly. The First Nations farms that are seeing success are doing just that. This image that you're seeing on the slide, that's from Cowessess First Nations in Saskatchewan. Their farms called 4C farms. Now, they intentionally started small. You can see the tractor, the equipment there, it's older. They bought used. They intentionally started small, planting on just 700 acres, and they have planned to increase that to 3,000 acres over the course of a few years. They've been learning lessons all along the way, and they're getting better and bigger each year. So knowing the advantages of the latest technology, that can help you make those decisions. For example, like GPS on your seeder can help you plant with precision, efficiency. That can save you money. Same with harvest. That GPS technology and auto steer helps you be more efficient and save you serious money on gas for your equipment and things like that. Now, aside from financial products, like structure loans, equipment loans. FCC also offers farm management software. And we know there's huge opportunity to customize some of the aspects of this software to meet the unique needs of Indigenous farming. Right now, Ag Expert, as you see on the slide there, Ag Expert is our farm management software, and it's built for agriculture, and it's got some really great shortcuts, makes bookkeeping and record keeping and tracking, makes harvest and working with a team, has some really good elements within the app that really make keeping track of all the records for farming easier. Being able to share with your accountant or with chief of counsel, things like that, securely on the cloud, whether you're offline or online. There's just a lot of aspects worth looking into on Ag Expert. But as I said, we're looking into customizing some of those aspects to meet more of the unique needs for Indigenous farming. So myself and others on the Indigenous Relations team at FCC are working with the FCC software team on customizing certain aspects of Ag Expert to make it even more applicable to First Nations ag and food businesses than it already is. Now, agriculture and food, as I said, it's a big player in the Canadian economy. First Nations are positioned to become leaders in this industry. As we've seen, First Nations businesses, people, and communities, they face unique challenges in agriculture and food, but there are numerous tapped and untapped advantages and opportunities. First Nations communities, businesses, they have potential to be leaders in this industry. And I know I keep saying that, but that's the mission that kind of drives our team. At FCC, we've talked with chiefs, CEOs, farm managers about First Nations in agriculture. And we see that their approach to economic development is that they aren't simply operating a business. They're protecting and growing their language, their culture, and their traditions. They're embedding First Nations knowledge and values into their business mission, their vision, their values. Agriculture and food can help drive their higher purpose to support the well-being of their shareholder, which of course is their community members, well into the future. And as stewards of the land, the responsibility to preserve and protect First Nations lands for the benefit of future generations is paramount in the feedback that we're receiving. So as First Nations re-enter into the agriculture sector, it'll be exciting to see the types of products, governance, business, social enterprise, land management, and farming models that are being developed to support the community values and aspirations. And I'll just finish off by saying the agriculture sector represents one of the greatest opportunities for First Nations communities to nurture their economic development goals and aspirations. And those nations without the large land bases, that they may find opportunities in fishing, forestry, non-timber forest products, aquaculture, the agri-food and agribusiness value chain. There's so much opportunity, and we encourage every nation, every business to look into what works best for them. With access to substantial areas of arable land, niche products, and knowledge, agri-food and agribusiness and export opportunities, First Nations are also complemented by the fastest growing population in Canada. And so this, again, is another bonus, another plus, another positive point for First Nations and their position to succeed in agriculture. If you do have any inquiries on lending, I encourage you to contact this email. This would get you to reach our team. We are a small team here at FCC, but we're working on developing our Indigenous lending strategy. Now, we are lending into Indigenous businesses, Indigenous farm, Indigenous food right now, but we want to just make sure that we can have a strategy that speaks to all the different unique challenges, any roadblocks. We want to make sure that we're ready for anything that comes up to be able to customize it. So we're just working on the back end of our things to make sure our lending strategy will completely match the needs of Indigenous customers. So I encourage you, if you have any lending inquiries, contact that email right there and let us know what you need or what your concerns are. I also would ask for any feedback about this presentation. If there was something that you were hoping to hear but you didn't hear, by all means, let us know there as well. And that's me right there. That's my contact. If you want to reach me directly, jesse.robson@fcc.ca. So,
Awesome.
yes, I thank you all for listening and hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. Just so you know that this presentation will be sent to you. So those emails that you saw at the end, you will have that in your email. And I really encourage you, if you do have any questions, if there is even like a little smidge of interest, just start that conversation, start that dialogue, shoot them a message, make that connection. So you talked about you had submitted to the Journal of Aboriginal Economic Development. When does that article come out, or is it out yet?
Yeah, so that is, we're working with Cando to try to nail down the date. They said due to COVID, there were some issues with the printing press. And so they said end of February, the printing would be done. And I think now it's just a matter of getting those copies out and then getting a digital version,
Oh,
sent out as well. So it should be out pretty soon.
so it's just around the corner, just like spring. Spring is just around the corner. So we look forward to reading that article. From your research, what was the biggest kind of learning for you or finding for you when you were compiling all of that information?
For me, I would say as I was talking about the fee simple lands and the opportunity there for First Nations when acquiring land for agricultural use to consider using the fee simple lands, just because it gives them power to balance the advantages of fee simple land with the advantages of reserve land that they already own, and being able to have a model where you use both, and your business is taking place on reserve land and other aspects are taking place off reserve land, and just being able to balance that. I think that's a pretty unique advantage that First Nations communities, corporations could definitely be taking advantage of. So I think that would probably be my answer.
Very interesting. I really liked what you had to say, that First Nations have a very unique opportunity. They can be leaders in this industry. And I really liked what the elder had said too, is just getting our youth, like teaching them about this agriculture, passing on that knowledge, because it's something that our young people can really invest in, to learn in and be involved in. So does anyone have any questions or comments? You can unmute yourself, you can use that chat box, but we'll create some space for you to lend your voice to this conversation.
No questions from me, but I'd like to thank you for the presentation, Jesse. It's good.
Awesome. Thank you for enjoying.
Yeah, great feedback. Thank you. All right, anyone else?
One thing I mentioned towards the end there was about the sort of the non-ag related, non-timber forest products and aquaculture, things like that. That's something that's on the rise as well, and a lot of businesses are looking into that. A lot of communities are looking into that, and it's something where, like, if you don't have these vast tracts of land, there's still ways to enter into the ag and food business, and I think that's an important point as well. So, keep your ear to the ground for all the opportunities, for sure.
Thank you. Okay, well, if there are no questions or comments, we just want to say thank you for joining us this afternoon. I hope you walk away with a little bit more knowledge. Maybe you have some questions, maybe there's some stirring, you're thinking about how you can maybe incorporate this into your communities, or at least start that conversation and dialogue. I think anything great starts with, a thought, an idea, and that dialogue. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Jesse, for just creating time in your schedule to speak to us about this. We really honor and appreciate the knowledge that you bring to the table. So thank you very much. For the rest, I hope you have a good rest of the day here in Edmonton. The sun's still shining. It still feels like a spring day. So I'm going to head outside. All this talk about land we're stewards as Indigenous people. We're stewards of this land, and it's important for us to make that connection to the Mother Earth. So I'm going to go out and make a connection to Mother Earth. Maybe you can go out, get some fresh air, good for the heart, good for the soul, good for the mental health. So I thank you for being here. We give thanks to Creator for the gift of another day, the gift of learning, the gift of community members coming to share their knowledge with us. We give thanks for all of these gifts. We ask for healing, for support, for love to all of our relations. And we think of our friends and family, but we also think of the land, the animals, the water, the plants, that Creator would heal all of us. Hi, hi.